This thing costs $598. $598 for a single tube trap. It's ridiculous when this is literally just a cylindrically shaped porous absorber. Let's get into it. Hey, what's up? It's Jesko again from AcousticsInsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. And this is week 3 in the bass trap breakdown series, where I explain every single type of bass trap out there, cut through the nonsense, and help you make smart and evidence-based decisions about your acoustic treatment. If you haven't downloaded it yet, this series is accompanied by my complete guide to bass traps and bass trapping. I'll link it down in the description. It's completely free. And everything I'll be covering, from foam wedges to tuned bass traps, is all neatly organized in there for you to reference at any time, so that when you're out there looking for bass traps, if you're thinking about DIYing, building your own designs, you know what it is you're actually doing, what you're looking at, what you're hopefully buying, obviously how certain bass traps work and potential causes of confusion, what they actually do in your room, how and when to use them, how many you'd need, and the pros and cons of each. Now, last week we looked at porous absorber bass traps, the kind of workhorse of DIY home studios. So check that out. I'll also link it in the description. And this week we're moving on to tube traps. I get asked about tube traps all the time. I have a lot of opinions about tube traps. And as you'll see, this particular space is just oozing with nonsense and BS. It's incredible, really. Now, amongst all the different types of bass traps out there, these are probably the easiest to identify. It's basically a hollow tube, a hollow cylinder made of porous insulation material. They're usually somewhere between 2 to 4 feet long, and they're sometimes half covered with some type of reflective foil. Now, the original inventor of the tube trap is Acoustics Corporation, and they really have some pretty lofty claims about how this thing works. There are also a number of copies out there that you can buy, probably most notably the Hofa bass trap. So let's dive into some of this. And always remember, this is literally just a tube made out of porous absorption. Like literally the same insulation material we use in our porous bass traps. It's exactly the same, just in a cylindrical shape. That's it. Now, there is a lot of marketing confusion around about this, as I already mentioned, and I'm just going to pick a few little things here and there because it is literally all over the place. But so let's look at the tube trap Isothermal, which I showed you in the intro of this video. So this is the standard version that ASC sells at a diameter of 13 inches and 36 inches long at $589. This goes up to a diameter of 24 inches with a length of 48 inches. This thing costs $1,500 for a single unit. Oh my. But so yeah, let's dive in. They claim this ASC Isothermal tube trap is a self-contained broadband acoustic absorber diffuser. Okay, so far so good. If it's broadband, that means it's porous absorption, right? Because if it was tuned, it wouldn't be broadband. It would work at a much narrower frequency. It works by utilizing a reactive acoustic circuit that is powered by the sound pressure in your room. So already here, we're diving into a lot of voodoo, right? They're basically using the electrical equivalent circuit model. You can model any type of mechanical system, acoustical system, a lot of systems out there. You can model using electrical analogs. And they're using this in their marketing. That's why they call it a reactive acoustic circuit. But then they say is powered by the sound pressure in your room. I don't even know what that is supposed to mean. I mean, is it tuned or is it not? Is it broadband or is it narrow frequency? Is this a resonance device or not? It's basically unclear. All of our tube trap line, the Isothermal works best where the sound pressure is the strongest, which is in the corners and against the walls in your room. Isothermal tube traps are an improved tube trap that provides double absorbing power in the sub-bass range below 60 Hz and enhanced bass absorption up through middle C or 260 Hz. And then they have this weird, confusing picture here. I think this is supposed to show you the difference between facing the foil side into the room and or having it turned towards the wall, so the actual insulation material, the porous side, is facing the room. Yeah, so that's how this is supposed to control, as they say, the treble in the room, by either having that foil facing the room and reflecting and scattering sound, or having it face the wall and the open side facing the room, and so this treble reflection doesn't happen. The isothermal tube trap includes the traditional built-in treble range diffuser to back scatter and diffuse the upper treble range back into the room, and to also enhance development of fine-grained lateral ambience in the room. That's some nice wording there. So far, this is all good. We developed the isothermal tube trap to aggressively manage typical hi-fi rear wall bounce phase cancel effects. What we got was a major performance boost across the entire bass spectrum, and we did it without altering the fundamental voice of tube trap. What the voice of a tube trap is, I don't know, but basically they're just talking about managing or damping speaker boundary interference. Right? Just sound reflecting off of nearby surfaces to the speaker, reflecting back, and then interacting with the direct sound from the speaker. Standard speaker boundary interference effects. And yeah, obviously, if you absorb low frequencies to stop speaker boundary interference, you're probably also damping some of the standing wave effects in the room, which is why you get an improvement across the entire spectrum. Although they call it a major performance boost. So we're boosting something. Check out the absorption data for the new 16-inch isothermal tube trap compared to a standard 16-inch tube trap. Power is doubled in the sub-bass range, while the LF roll-off is extended by over half an octave. They call this absorption data, but then they just have this little diagram that literally looks like it was hand-drawn. I don't know. I mean, to be fair, getting correct absorption frequencies in the lowest frequencies, aka below 100 hertz, is notoriously difficult. And it's expensive as well. It's one of the reasons why I don't have scientific absorption data on the units in my Build a Better Bass Trap course, because it's basically impossible for me to get that data. But then again, I also don't claim that my design does anything beyond what the models suggest. In fact, in my experience, it's very close to what the model says. That's just how acoustics works. It's physics. There's nothing crazy going on. What is the isothermal effect? The short story begins with the statement that when you compress gas, it heats up, while when it expands, it cools down. That is true. If you get a bicycle air pump, and you close off the end and you put pressure on it, you'll notice how it heats up. Also notice just how much air pressure you need for the temperature to go up. High pressure sounds entering the acoustic capacitor of a tube trap cause a rise in pressure or compression. When the air pressure inside the tube trap reaches that of the ambient air outside it, the capacitor is essentially full. The air then cools off fairly rapidly due to thermal and hydraulic losses and returns to low pressure, ready to be filled up again. The frequency of this filling up is proportional to, you guessed it, the frequency of the sound. Therefore, low frequency sounds fill up the capacitor much more quickly due to the slowness with which they propagate through the media. A larger capacitor, think of a 24-inch tube trap, takes the longest to fill and so reaches the lowest frequencies. Man, this is just, I don't even have words for it. This is just all over the place. When the thing is that they even claim themselves that this is a broadband absorber and that the diameter increases the effect on low frequency absorption, which is just a standard description of a porous absorber. The conversion of the capacitive section of a tube trap into an isothermal vessel alters this behavior in a very beneficial way. The low-pressure air inside the capacitor is prevented from rising in temperature upon being subjected to a high-pressure pulse. Through this action, the effective size of the capacitor is increased by 40%, almost as though the isothermal tube trap is 40% larger than it appears. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, they have no proof whatsoever that this actually works. These claims aren't corroborated by any other science out there. I don't even know what to say. Like, this is in my opinion, this is complete BS. Yeah, very nice marketing talk, but completely outside the realm of physics. Let's go look at the page of the original tube trap and see if there are any more interesting claims. The tube trap's cylinder shape provides the structural rigidity and internal air cavity necessary to absorb sound in the low frequency range and operates far more efficiently and to a lower frequency than the size would suggest. Why an internal air cavity is necessary to absorb sound in the low frequency range is new to me. And they also say it's their diameter, not the length, that determines how deep into the bass range they can absorb, because tube traps are impedance matched to sound. They are fast acting bass traps. I mean, this is standard porous absorber stuff. This is nothing new or nothing particular to a round shape or a hollow air space inside the insulation material. This is just standard porous material absorption stuff. Because the tube trap only reacts to sound pressure, it is sometimes referred to as a pressure zone bass trap. Although the tube trap is a broadband sound trap, it can be modified by adding additional acoustic circuitry to give it an enhanced narrow band range of sound absorption in the addition to its broadband bass trap properties. However, this is not to be confused with a tuned bass trap, which is exclusively a narrow band bass trap and has no broadband properties. Well, which is it? You can't have both. It's either tuned, narrow band, and a pressure absorber, or not tuned, broadband, and a velocity absorber. And they just claim it's both. For the most part, the tuning of the tube trap is actually not done with internal circuitry, but done by the room itself. Okay, so now they claim that it's the room that tunes the device. And again, I don't even know how to respond to this. It's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. And again, obviously a whole description of these things being pressure absorbers when they're clearly not, because they're made out of porous material. Oh my God. Okay, let's move on from this nonsense. Just another descriptor so you can identify them. Obviously, these are also the main component in the attack wall, which is also an invention by Acoustic Sciences Corporation, ASC, and it's basically just sticking a whole bunch of tube traps around and under and over your speakers. It's basically just building a gigantic absorber wall. That's all it is, and they just gave it a fancy name and claim that it's somehow better than everything else out there. Okay, so what do they actually do? Well, according to their own material, very hard to say. In my experience, these are literally just porous absorbers in a cylindrical shape. So just like all the porous absorbers we looked at in the previous videos, these basically absorb sound by the sound velocity, the movement of the air molecules in the sound wave, rubbing against the fibers in the insulation material, and that induces heat or creates heat, which basically robs the sound wave of energy. That's how they absorb sound energy. And just like with all other porous absorber materials, it's the depth of the material in front of the reflecting boundary that determines how low down in frequency they absorb. But then on top of that, they offer them with a partially reflecting surface. So half of the cylinder is covered in some sort of reflecting foil that basically reflects high frequencies, as with some of the other porous material traps with a limp membrane that we looked at. The low frequencies can still travel around this surface, this reflecting surfaces, and get absorbed, while the high frequencies are reflected. And obviously, because of the shape, they're scattered in multiple directions. That's how you get the kind of diffusing effect from this surface foil. Just like any other porous material trap, and like how they say themselves, you basically can place them in corners in order to get low frequency absorption. You can also just place them on the walls for standard mirror point reflection absorption. It's basically just like any other porous absorber, and you'd use it the same way. Obviously, on top of that, they have this reflecting surface foil, so you can turn that into the room if you want to create a bit more liveliness in the room, if you want to maintain some more ambience. If you like a slightly more controlled sound, you turn that foil towards the wall, towards the corner, so it doesn't face the room, and so the open side is basically fully absorbing the sound that hits it. But using them is really what I have the most problem with when it comes to tube traps, because the shape is so limiting in terms of what you can do with it. On one hand, basically you can just stack them vertically, but sound works in all 3 dimensions. It doesn't just care about vertical corners. You want to get plenty of absorption under the ceiling into the wall ceiling corners, and doing that with tube traps is pretty difficult. On top of that, they actually offer limited amount of useful surface area when it comes to low-end absorption. The main 2 variables that determine how well a porous material absorbs sound is, on one hand, the depth to determine how low down in frequency it absorbs, and then the surface area covered to basically determine how much sound is absorbed. And with this shape, you actually get less surface area at the depth that you need for low frequency absorption. So it's, in my opinion, way more efficient to just work with a flat surface, because you basically get that entire surface, or at least most of it, when you're placing it across a corner, at the depth that you need to actually absorb low frequencies. So in terms of when to use them, it's just, again, just like with any other porous material bass trap, you're basically using them for everything. These are broadband devices. They absorb highs, mids, and some low end if you use them right. And so they are the most flexible type of tool to use for all duties in a home studio, be it low frequency absorption, standing wave damping, be it speaker boundary interference, or absorption of boundary effects, basically, as well as just standard reflection control. You basically use these for all the duties that you need them for in the studio. And also, if you want more absorption while maintaining some liveliness, this is another option, because you have that reflective foil that you can use to reduce the amount of high frequency, high mid frequency absorption that you're getting from your treatment. But of course, the real answer to when to use them is, in my opinion, never. Because the price-performance ratio is very poor. You're getting very little absorption for a lot of money, and there are just so many better options out there, including obviously the porous absorber bass trap that we talked about in last week's video. Again, this is a game of depth and surface area covered. So it's just a matter of determining how much surface area you want to cover and then buying the appropriate amount of bass traps, or tube traps in this case. I would probably say you'd need somewhere between 4 to 8 units in one go in order to actually see a significant effect. Just putting 1 or 2 of these in one corner, it's not going to do much. All right, that brings us to the pros and cons. There are a few pros here. Again, these are mainly just the standard pros of your standard porous material absorbers. They're relatively easy to use. You can place them anywhere. They're broadband absorbers. You can stack them, and at least for stacking, there's no extra mounting required. And you can control the high frequency absorption and basically have some control over the liveliness, the feel of the room. In terms of cons, it's mainly 3. First one is the shape. The tube shape is not an advantage in my opinion. It's a disadvantage because it makes it less flexible to use, but also means that you basically need a lot more of them to cover the same amount of surface area. And then obviously the price, which is just ridiculous. Okay, so in summary, tube traps, they're basically just overpriced porous absorbers. That's all they are. Don't be distracted by all the marketing hype. There's so much BS in there, it's hard to fathom. You're basically just paying for the myth, when in essence, this is just a porous absorber in a cylindrical shape. Next week, we're finally diving into resonance absorbers. Very exciting, in particular membrane absorbers. Very interesting, also very confusing, but make sure you're on the lookout for that. And of course, if you're ready to finally stop second guessing the low end in your studio, if you want step-by-step instructions on a proven design, check out my Build a Better Bass Trap course at the link in the description. It comes without the ridiculous price tag. In fact, in my opinion, this is the absolute Goldilocks zone in terms of bass traps for home studios. So I covered it all, what depth exactly you need to pick and why, how to find the right material in your area, obviously designing your own bass trap, how to design your own diffuser front, putting those slats on top of your bass trap in order to keep the room lively if you want, and then obviously step-by-step construction videos that you can follow along on your build. So check that out at the link in the description. But with that, let's get back to learning to trust our ears and having fun making music in the studio. It's been a long one. I'll see you in the next video.